The air inside Wembley Stadium pulsed like it was alive. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was a physical force, a wall of noise that slammed into every ribcage, rattled every eardrum, and turned the night sky above London into a living, breathing creature of sound. 50,000 voices thundered in unison, wave after wave of screams, chants, and rhythmic claps that rolled across the concrete bowl like a storm surge. Spotlights carved through the darkness, beams of white and gold slicing across a sea of raised hands, and in the center of it all stood a man who seemed larger than life itself. Freddie Mercury, drenched in sweat, chest gleaming beneath the floodlights, his trademark white tank top clinging to his skin like armor, his mouth curled into that sly, feline grin, half challenge, half seduction, as he whipped the bottom half of his microphone stand in a circle, then slammed it into the stage like a sword into stone. The roar of the crowd hit again, louder this time. Chants of Freddie, Freddie, Freddie rolled from one side of Wembley to the other, ricocheting back in a perfect rhythm that felt rehearsed though it wasn't. This was worship, pure and unfiltered. Tens of thousands of throats straining at once to give their devotion to the man who had taught them what it meant to live loudly, unapologetically, dangerously. The band was in place behind him. Brian May with his red special slung across his shoulders, Roger Taylor poised above the drum kit, John Deacon steady at his bass. They were waiting for the signal, the tiny nod, the subtle flick of Freddie's hand that would unleash the first notes of the night's opening number. But the nod never came. Freddie raised a mic, his fingers gripping the silver shaft like it might slip away if he loosened them even slightly. His eyes scanned the endless wave of faces stretching into infinity, disappearing into darkness beyond the floodlights. Normally, he thrived on this. The electric energy of a crowd, the intoxicating mix of love and chaos. But tonight something shifted. Somewhere between his hand rising and the words forming in his throat, the sound caught, his breath jammed. He froze. For a split second, no one noticed. The crowd only screamed louder, convinced this dramatic pause was part of the show, a tease. Freddie played his audience like he always did. They screamed because that's what they were trained to do. He gave them silence. They filled it with noise. But Freddie didn't move. His grin faltered. His chest rose too fast, too shallow. Beneath the bright lights, his skin looked pale, almost waxy, like the color had drained away. His eyes, usually so sharp, so alive, darted wildly as though searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He shifted his weight, one foot sliding half an inch backward, the subtle body language of retreat. On stage, the band exchanged puzzled looks. Roger tapped his drumsticks nervously against the rim, a soft click, click, click that didn't carry over the speakers. Brian leaned forward slightly, trying to catch Freddie's eyes, silently mouthing, "You good?" Freddie didn't respond. The seconds stretched. 10, 20, 30, a lifetime compressed into moments. The silence wasn't silence. It was screaming fans, fireworks popping in the distance, the hum of amplifiers. But around Freddie it felt like a vacuum, a crushing nothingness that swallowed every sound. He swallowed hard, raised the mic closer to his lips, and whispered, so soft it wasn't meant to be heard, "I can't do this." But the microphone caught it, and Wembley heard it. For the first time in his career, Freddie Mercury, the master of stages, the peacock showman, the voice that conquered continents, stood trembling, paralyzed, exposed in front of 50,000 people. The crowd's roar faltered, a ripple of confusion passing like a shadow across the stands. The front rows leaned forward, straining to see his face. Cameras zoomed in, giant screens magnifying every twitch of his trembling hands. Some fans thought it was an act, a setup for some grander punchline, but the longer it stretched on, the harder it became to believe. Freddie Mercury wasn't playing. Freddie Mercury was terrified. The band stayed frozen, their instruments quiet. Brian gripped his guitar tighter, torn between charging into a riff to break the silence and waiting for Freddie to regain himself. Roger, his jaw clenched, whispered to John, "What the hell's happening?" But John only shook his head, his eyes never leaving Freddie. The chants broke apart, replaced by murmurs, questions, confusion. The collective energy that had moments earlier felt like a tidal wave now felt like a storm breaking apart, chaotic, disoriented. And in the middle of it all, Freddie stood motionless, locked inside himself. He saw the faces, thousands of them, each one staring, each one demanding. Normally, he loved that gaze, thrived on it, turned it into power. But tonight it pierced him. It was as though every single soul in the stadium was peering straight through the glitter, the bravado, the mask, and seeing him. Not Freddie Mercury, the rock god, but Ferret Bulsara, the boy who had once been terrified of being different. His throat tightened. His hand shook so violently he had to grip the microphone stand to keep it steady. The stage lights, which he had stood under countless times before, now felt like interrogation lamps, scorching, relentless. His chest heaved, his heart hammered, so loud he could hear it in his own ears. He whispered again, almost begging himself this time, I can't do this. And though the words were faint, caught in the storm of sound, those closest to the stage heard them. They saw his lips move. They saw the tremble in his jaw. And they realized this wasn't theater. This was collapse. The man who had commanded Live Aid, who had made the world sing in unison, who strutted like a king across every stage he touched, was unraveling in front of them. And Wembley held its breath. 8 minutes of silence at the Astrodome had once redefined Elvis Presley. What would these minutes at Wembley do to Freddie Mercury? The answer hadn't yet been written. All that existed in that moment was a man, a microphone, and 50,000 people waiting to see if he would fall or rise. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. Hours earlier, Wembley had been humming like a machine. Trucks unloading gear, roadies coiling cables, engineers testing lights, instruments being tuned in the cavernous echo of the empty stadium. To the crew, it was just another show. Another big night, sure, but Queen had done big nights before. Nothing about this seemed destined to be different. Nothing except Freddie. Normally, backstage before a concert, Freddie Mercury was impossible to ignore. He'd stalk the halls like a cat who owned the world, rehearsing warm-up scales at full volume, making bawdy jokes that had everyone laughing, swigging vodka from a tall glass and waving it around like a royal scepter. His voice would cut through the chatter with the same authority it did through music. Sharp, playful, commanding. But tonight, the silence was unusual. In the cramped dressing room plastered with mirrors and flowers sent by adoring fans, Freddie sat slouched in a chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His black eyeliner had already been applied. His chest glistened with a dusting of powder to catch the lights, but his usual flamboyance was nowhere to be seen. His hands toyed absent-mindedly with the base of his microphone stand, spinning it slowly like a nervous tick. Brian may notice it first. He leaned against the wall, cradling his guitar as though testing a string in his head. "You're quiet tonight," he said gently. Freddie didn't look up. He gave the smallest of shrugs. Roger Taylor, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a drumstick in each hand, chimed in, "Too quiet, mate. You've not even insulted my haircut yet. That's when I know something's wrong." Still nothing but that nervous spin of the mic stand. Finally, Freddie exhaled through his nose, a short huff. "It's just, there's a lot of people out there." Roger laughed. "There's always a lot of people out there. It's Wembley, Freddie. It's what you wanted. It's what you live for." But Freddie shook his head. He finally looked up, and the others saw something in his eyes they weren't used to: uncertainty. Not doubt in his music, not doubt in the band, doubt in himself. "Usually when I walk out," he said slowly, voice quieter than usual, "I feel like I'm in control, like I can twist them around my finger. But tonight," he hesitated, searching for words, "tonight it feels like they'll see right through me. Not Freddie Mercury, the performer. Me. Just me. And what if that's not enough?" Brian shifted, uncomfortable. He wasn't used to seeing his friend like this. "You're Freddie Bloody Mercury," he said, almost pleading. "You face bigger crowds than this." Freddie smirked faintly, but it was thin, almost brittle. "Yes, darling. But have I ever faced this? 50,000 voices in one place? You can hear them even back here, like they're breathing down your neck." As if on cue, the muffled roar of the audience filtered through the concrete walls of the stadium, a low rumble that sounded like distant thunder. Every minute, it swelled louder as more fans poured in, chanting, stomping. calling his name. It wasn't just noise, it was expectation. He tilted his head, listening. Hear that? That's not applause. That's hunger. The room went quiet. Freddie rose suddenly, pacing. He tugged at the hem of his tank top, adjusted the wristband on his arm, rubbed his hands together as though to burn off nerves. I built this persona, he muttered, half to himself, half to the room. The showman, the strut, the poses, the bloody peacock feathers. They all believe in him. But what if tonight he doesn't show up? What if they look at me and see someone ordinary? Roger rolled his eyes. You? Ordinary? Impossible. But Freddie didn't laugh. Instead, he moved the mirror. He stared at his reflection, at the painted eyes, the oiled chest, the costume of invincibility he wore so well. For a long moment, he studied himself in silence. Then very softly, he said, I feel naked. Brian stood. Freddie? But before he could continue, the door burst open and a road manager leaned in. 5 minutes, lads. The moment shattered. Freddie straightened, plastering on a smirk. He twirled the mic stand with exaggerated flair, flashing that familiar grin. Right, he said briskly. Let's give them a night they'll never forget. But as the others filed out, Freddie lingered behind a second longer. Alone in the room, he whispered his reflection. Don't fail me now. The walk to the stage felt endless. The hallway was narrow, lined with cables and half-empty water bottles. The thump of the crowd above vibrating through the concrete, like the heartbeat of a giant. Every step Freddie took echoed louder in his own ears. At the end of the tunnel, the entrance glowed with light. He could see the silhouette of security guards, the flashes of cameras, hear the feverish pitch of fans who had spotted movement. The chant started, Freddie, 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 and it grew until it was deafening. His body screamed to turn around, to run back down the hallway and disappear. But his legs carried him forward, toward the light, toward the noise, toward the cage of expectation that awaited him. Brian walked just ahead, guitar slung across his back. He glanced over his shoulder once, catching Freddie's eye. He gave a nod, subtle, steadying, brotherly. Roger cracked his drumsticks together in rhythm with the crowd, already psyching himself up. John adjusted his bass strap, silent, stoic, a pillar of calm. And then it was Freddie's turn. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, Queen. The stadium erupted. Fireworks exploded. Floodlights swept the sky, and 50,000 people leapt to their feet, as if pulled by strings. Freddie stepped into the light. The sound hit him like a hurricane. Screams, claps, stomps, all colliding into one overwhelming wall of devotion. The sheer scale of it buckled his knees. For a moment, he smiled, playing the part. He raised the mic stand like a sword, striking a pose. The audience screamed louder, thinking the game had begun. But inside, Freddie wasn't playing anymore. His chest was tight, his throat dry. The sea of faces seemed infinite, endless rows of eyes boring into him, stripping him bare. The band waited for his cue. The crowd begged for his voice, but his body refused to move. He felt the mask slip, the showman retreat, and beneath it, only a frightened man remained. For the first 30 seconds, nobody thought anything of it. Freddie Mercury had always been dramatic. He was a master of timing, the king of pauses that whipped a crowd into a frenzy. He could stop mid-song, cock his head with that sly grin, and make 50,000 people scream for more. The silence was part of the game, or so the audience thought. But 30 seconds became 45. A minute. The crowd kept screaming, waiting for the opening line, waiting for the familiar explosion of sound that never came. Instead, Freddie stood center stage, motionless. The microphone hovered at his lips, his fingers locked tight around the stand. His chest heaved in short, sharp bursts. His eyes darted across the stadium, wide, unfocused, like a man drowning in the middle of an ocean. The cameras, trained to catch every gesture, zoomed in. On the giant screens, Freddie's face filled the night sky above Wembley. The image shocked those in the upper rows who couldn't see the stage clearly, because up close, he didn't look confident, playful, or in control. He looked terrified. Brian May shifted his weight. his hand tightening on the neck of his guitar. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward Freddie, the usual signal. We're ready when you are. But Freddie didn't nod back. He didn't move at all. Roger Taylor twirled his drumsticks anxiously, glancing toward the sound techs as though asking if there was a technical failure. John Deacon, the quietest of them all, simply stood still, his eyes fixed on Freddie, his bass hanging silent at his side. What the hell is going on? Roger muttered under his breath, though no one could hear him. On the big screens, Freddie's lips moved, barely parting. A whisper, almost lost in the hurricane of noise. I can't do this. The microphone, live and unforgiving, caught it. The words boomed through Wembley, unintentional and raw, like a confession torn from a soul. The sound crashed into the audience like a wave. At first, people thought it was an act, Freddie playing coy, teasing them, building suspense. But then came the tremor in his hand, visible even from the back rows, the way his knuckles whitened against the mic stand. His shoulders trembled, his jaw clenched. Whispers spread through the crowd. Did you hear that? He said he can't do this. The roar softened into uneasy murmurs. The collective energy began to shift. What had been a tidal wave of devotion was breaking into ripples of confusion, uncertainty. The stadium, designed to hold 50,000 voices, suddenly felt fragile. Freddie swallowed hard. The microphone still inches from his lips. The lights overhead seared his vision, turning the faces into a blur of indistinguishable shapes. Usually, he loved that anonymity, the facelessness of a crowd that made him feel like a god standing above them. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, he didn't see a mass of fans. He saw eyes, thousands and thousands of eyes, each one staring directly at him. Seeing him, not Freddie Mercury, the untouchable showman, but Freddie the man, the boy who had once been Farrokh Bulsara, the child who had feared never fitting in, the outsider who had crafted a glittering mask to shield himself from rejection. And now, under Wembley's merciless lights, the mask was crumbling. His breath quickened. In his ears, the crowd's noise no longer sounded like adoration. It sounded like pressure, a demand he couldn't possibly fulfill. His vision tunneled, the edges blurring, the stadium spinning around him. The microphone trembled visibly in his hand. Move, he told himself. Say something, anything. But his body refused. The band held still, afraid that the wrong note would shatter the fragile moment. Brian edged a half-step forward, but stopped when he saw Freddie's face. He'd never seen that expression before, pure fear, raw and unguarded. Minutes ticked by. 2, 3. It was unbearable, surreal. The greatest frontman in rock, paralyzed before the world. In the third row, a teenage girl named Claire nudged her father. Something's wrong, she whispered. He looked scared. Her father nodded grimly. He is scared. The realization began to ripple through the stands. One by one, fans stopped cheering and started staring, hushed and uncertain. The roar dissolved into a tense quiet, punctuated by scattered shouts. We love you, Freddie. It's okay. Freddie heard them, faintly, but in his mind, their words twisted. They'll see through you. They'll know you're not enough. They'll know you're ordinary. He shook his head, whispering again, I can't. His knees buckled slightly, and for a terrifying second, it looked as though he might collapse. Roger half rose from his stool, ready to rush forward if he fell. But Freddie caught himself, gripping the mic stand like a lifeline, knuckles white, chest heaving. From the wings, crew members exchanged nervous glances. Should they intervene? Cut the lights? But no one dared move. No one dared break the spell of those unbearable minutes. The silence grew heavier. Not silence, really. There were still murmurs, scattered shouts, but compared to the roaring chaos Wembley was built for, it was silence. A silence that pressed down on the stage like a weight. James Burton, Elvis Presley's guitarist, had once said he'd never seen anything stranger than Elvis's freeze in Houston. Had he been at Wembley that night, he would have understood. It wasn't just a pause. It wasn't just nerves. It was something deeper. It was a man unraveling in front of 50,000 witnesses. The silence stretched to 4 minutes. then 5. Each second carved into the memory of every soul present. Some fans began to weep, not out of disappointment, but out of recognition. They had come to see a god, but what they saw instead was a man, vulnerable and afraid. Freddie's lips quivered. He looked out across the ocean of faces. His eyes glistened, the beginnings of tears forming. He wanted to run. He wanted to vanish. But something kept him rooted to that stage, some fragile thread between him and those 50,000 people. And that thread was about to snap or be saved. The moment teetered on a knife's edge. Up on the screens, Freddie's face hovered, larger than the moon, eyes glassy, jaw trembling, breath too quick for song. Down in the third row, Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She could feel the people around her holding their breath, waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come on its own. She stood. It was a small movement, swallowed by the stadium, until she brought her palms together. Once, twice, slow, deliberate, not the rabid clamor Wembley expected, but a steady heartbeat of sound. Clap, clap, clap. "It's okay, Freddie," she called, voice breaking into the immensity. "We love you." A security guard turned, startled. A boy with a denim jacket and a queen patch on the back looked up from the floor seat next to her, then rose too, matching her rhythm. A woman 3 seats overjoined, then a cluster behind, their hands moving in unison. It was clumsy at first, offbeat, a human thing finding its tempo. On the screens, the cameras caught her. Just for a second, a teenage girl, cheeks wet, hands lifted, clapping not at a man's show, but to gift a lifeline. The image flashed and was gone, but it was enough. A new sound began to ripple outward. Clap, clap, clap. It reached the second tier, then the third. On stage, Brian May turned slightly, as if he'd felt a breeze. His eyes found Freddie's profile, frozen and shining under the lights. Roger Taylor stilled his restless sticks. John Deacon tipped his head, listening. "Do you hear that?" Brian murmured. To himself, to the air. Freddie heard it in fragments at first, like rain on distant tin. A beat that didn't push him but held him. The chant of his name, Freddie, Freddie, had faded. Something gentler had replaced it. And for a heartbeat, the ice in his chest cracked. 2 more claps, patient as a pulse. A drummer in the cheap seat stomped once with his heel, almost shyly, as if the concrete might scold him. Someone else stomped too. Stomp, stomp, clap. It wasn't "We will rock you," not swaggering, not demanding. It was the skeleton of it, softened by concern. Stomp, stomp, clap. It folded into the slower rhythm, a hush drum. 50,000 hands learning one another. Where a moment ago the crowd had been an ocean battering the stage, it was now a harbor, a body of water easing its waves to hold the ship still. Freddie's fingers loosened their death grip on the mic stand, just enough for blood to return to his knuckles. He blinked hard, and the halo blur of faces sharpened a fraction. He could suddenly tell cheek from eye, hand from mouth. Human beings, not teeth of a single devouring thing. A man with sleeve tattoos lifted his toddler onto his shoulders and clapped with the child's tiny hands. An elderly couple stood arm in arm and matched the rhythm. A young woman raised a lighter, its flame small and ridiculous against the night. Then another flickered to life, and another, and then 1,000 faint stars rose to meet the stage. Phone screens followed, a constellation born all at once. Up in the booth, the lighting director inhaled, then exhaled slowly and dialed the color temperature away from white. The harsh interrogation heat softened to late afternoon amber, warmed further by a blush of gold. The shadow under Freddie's eyes gentled. The line of his throat looked less like a rope and more like a vow. In the wings, a stagehand whispered, "Do we cut to black? Bring the curtain?" The stage manager watched Freddie, watched the tremor in his chest begin slow. "Hold," she said. Brian stepped forward, not to the lip of the stage, not a grandstand, but to stand beside. He didn't touch Freddie yet. He simply let their shoulders share a frame on the big screen, so that everyone could see the shape of a band, one man's fear, surrounded. The clapping gathered itself, tidy now, confident but careful, like 1,000 hands catching a falling crystal glass in the same instant. And over it, from somewhere in the east stands, a voice began to sing, thin, off-key, earnest. love of my life. It floated down like a paper lantern. Another voice caught it. Then another. A wrong note here. A cracked one there. Until the melody found its footing in the lungs of the many. You've hurt me. Brian's eyes flicked to Freddie. He lifted the red special and, barely there, brushed a chord, the softest breath of harmony, the musical equivalent of a hand outstretched. Roger tilted a cymbal with one finger and ghosted a kiss of brass. John added a single, rooted note that made the floor feel steady. Freddie's eyes shone. His throat worked. The songs he'd sung 1,000 times lived in his bones. But this was different. He wasn't being asked to perform. He was being invited to join. He looked at Brian. The guitarist lifted his chin. We'll follow you wherever you go. Or we'll go nowhere at all. Your choice. Freddie pressed the mic closer to his lips, not to speak, but to breathe into it. One long inhale, one longer exhale. The sound was amplified. 50,000 people matched him without being told, their shoulders rising like a tide, falling like a tide. Inhale, exhale. Somewhere, far above, the moon watched, and even it seemed to hold still. Claire's clapping softened until her hands merely met and rested there, as if in prayer. Tears dried in tracks on her cheeks. You're all right, she whispered, though he couldn't hear her, though maybe somehow he did. The melody swelled. Bring it back, bring it back. In their seats, strangers turned to each other and sang as if they'd always known one another. A man in a football jersey harmonized with a woman in a glitter jacket. A pair of boys who'd come for the anthems found themselves singing their mother's favorite ballad. It sounded, briefly, like a choir that had rehearsed its whole life for only this. On screen, Brian finally moved, the smallest lean, shoulder to shoulder with Freddie. He let his free hand rest on Freddie's upper arm. The contact was gentle, anchoring. Freddie flinched, then softened into it. Roger's voice reaching from the kit, low and careful. We've got you. Freddie's lips parted around a word that didn't yet come. He swallowed. The lights warmed another shade, the amber edging toward honey, a room being made out of stadium. From the booth, the front-of-house engineer brought the crowd mics up, flooding the PA with the congregation. The band held back, not to vanish, but to frame what mattered. Freddie closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he saw a boy in a far-off schoolyard, afraid of the way his name sounded in other mouths. He saw the first time he leaned into a microphone and discovered that volume could be armor, that theater could be a home. He saw the man who built himself out of swagger and satin and octave leaps and asked the world to love someone brighter than he felt. He opened his eyes again and saw 50,000 witnesses refusing to leave him alone inside of fear. His breath deepened. His shoulders lowered. The trembling in his hand lost its violence and became a tremor, then a quiver, then the memory of one. Look, Roger whispered, unnecessary as the screen showed it. Freddie's mouth shaping a thank you that didn't need sound. In the upper tier, the stomp clap faded completely, replaced by the single shared line of melody. The lighters and screens made galaxies on concrete. The air changed, the way air changes in a church when a congregation chooses kindness over doctrine. Freddie leaned toward the mic. The room quieted without being asked, the collective hush of people who want to catch every atom of what comes next. They're not leaving, he said, so softly it was almost just breath. Brian's grip firmed in answer. We're not, either. Down in the third row, Claire's father put an arm around her shoulders. She realized her hands had stopped shaking. She realized she was smiling. Freddie lifted his chin by a fraction. The amber on his face gilded the wet at the edge of his eyes until it looked like something earned, not something broken. He lifted the mic from its stand. It scraped the clip, an ordinary noise magnified until all of Wembley heard it. An everyday gesture transformed into ceremony. He moved one step forward. The band didn't play. The crowd didn't push. 50,000 people leaned in, an entire city's weight balancing on the single breath of a single man. Freddie drew that breath in, deep as a diver. He opened his mouth to speak. For a moment, the entire world fit inside a single inhale. Freddie drew it in slow, steady, the microphone catching the faint rasp that made 50,000 people match his breath without knowing why. Then he let it go, and when he spoke, his voice was small but clear, like a lamp found in a dark room. "I walked out here," he said, "and I was terrified. No theater, no wink, just truth, carried on the PA to the rafters. I thought I had to be perfect for you," he went on, the syllables careful, as if his mouth had to relearn honesty. "Louder, brighter, bigger than life. But you—" His eyes moved over the ocean of faces, not skimming this time, seeing, "You reminded me I only have to be real." A ripple moved through Wembley, soundless, but felt. On the screens, the corners of Freddie's mouth lifted. Nothing like his usual feline grin. Softer. Human. He glanced sideways. Brian, already reading him, nodded and lifted his guitar. Roger's hands hovered over the kit, not to command, but to cradle. John's left hand rested lightly on the fretboard, a steady heart ready to beat. Freddie took one more breath. "Let's begin again," he whispered, mostly to himself, then to all of them. "Let's start here." He didn't choose spectacle. He chose tenderness. "Love of my life," he sang, barely above a murmur, the first vowel-shaped note slipping into the warm amber air. Brian's answer came like a hand extended underwater. Gentle arpeggios that made the stadium feel smaller, closer, as if walls had grown around them and turned concrete into a room. Freddie's voice shook on the second line, and the shake made it truer. The audience stepped in instinctively, the melody catching in 50,000 throats at once. Not to drown him, but to carry him. "Don't take it away from me." A father in the upper tier found himself harmonizing with a stranger. Couples pressed shoulders together and forgot to film. Stage lights glazed wet on 1,000 cheeks and made it all look like something holy. Up in the third row, Claire sang with her hands still touching, palms together as if holding something fragile between them. Down on the floor, a patchwork of lighters and phone screens bobbed like buoys in a tide that had learned how to hold a ship steady. Freddie's voice grew as the verse unfolded, not in volume first, but in courage. It filled out like someone's handwriting, when they remember who they are. By the chorus, his vibrato steadied, the note stayed, and the amber of the lights deepened toward gold. He closed his eyes, not to hide, but to lean, and when he opened them again, the fear was still there. Only it had a hand to hold now. The final line hung in the air with the ache of something mended in the moment of breaking. Brian let the guitar ring. Roger's cymbal bloomed and faded like a long-held exhale. John's last note settled into the floorboards and made every shoe's sole feel the same pulse. Cheers swelled, but they weren't the old roar, all teeth and hunger. This was gratitude, a standing heartbeat. Freddie lowered the mic and pressed his palm to the curve of it, as if to quiet a creature that had been too loud and too lonely for too long. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying." He looked to his band. Without a word, the four of them rearranged the air. Brian nodded to Roger. John tipped the neck of his bass. Roger lifted his sticks and gave a soft count no one heard. Freddie curled 2 fingers, the tiniest conductor's cue, and the room understood something else was coming. Not a return of armor, but a rise. He planted his feet. "All right," he said, a faint spark flaring at last. "Let's sing." Roger brought his sticks down. Thumb, thumb, and John's bass landed beside him. Thumb, thumb. 1,000 feet answered from the concrete. Stomp, stomp. 1,000 more. Stomp, stomp. Hands met in the third beat. Clap, and now the skeleton they'd tapped earlier stood to its full height. No sneer, no swagger. A different "we will rock you." Not a taunt, but a promise. We will rock you because you are us. The pulse spread like fire through dry grass. The upper tiers stomped, then the floor, then the boxes, until Wembley was an instrument in the hands of its own people. Freddie paced the front lip of the stage with the mic half lowered, listening, smiling for real now. Small at first, then wider as the rhythm braided them all together. He tilted the microphone out, and the crowd sang the chorus without him, a grin cracking through his fear like sunlight through a seam. When he finally brought the mic back to his mouth, he didn't bellow. He threaded himself into the weave. "You got blood on your face," he sang, and the place detonated. Not because it was flawless, but because it was shared. He shaped the phrases like a man enjoying the fit of his own name again. walking the cliff edge with arms open, trusting the wind. By the time they slammed the last "We Will Rock You" into the night, Freddie was flushed and laughing, his chest heaving with a different kind of breath. He looked at his band as if to say thank you and sorry and I'm here all at once, and got four fond, exasperated, relieved looks right back. He turned to the mic one more, he said. For all of us. He didn't have to name it. Brian changed guitars with practice sweep. Roger rolled his shoulders. John checked his tuning by muscle memory alone. The first chords of "We Are the Champions" walked out like a procession, and Wembley met them kneeling and standing at the same time, kneeling in reverence, standing in defiance of everything that had tried to make any of them small. Freddie didn't sing it as a victory lap. He sang it as a survivor's hymn. "I've paid my dues," he began, and the line broke open from the inside, revealing veins and heat in a kitchen sink full of dishes, 1,000 rent checks, 1,000 quiet mornings, all the ordinary battles that never made posters. He held face and had my share of sand kicked in my face like he was admitting he'd swallowed grit a time or two. When he hit "But I've Come Through," he didn't flex, he softened, and the strength came from that. By the final chorus, he wasn't leading so much as riding the crest of 50,000 voices that had refused to let him disappear. The pronouns did the work. We are the champions, and for once the "we" felt literal. Not marketing, not myth. A stadium welded into a plural. On the last of the world, Freddie didn't punch the note into submission. He opened his throat, let it bloom, and when his breath ran out the crowd, kept the vowel alive for him, passing it one to another until it settled on the roof like a star. Silence followed. Not empty, full. The kind of silence after a prayer when no one wants to be the first to move in case the miracle notices and leaves. Then the wave broke. The cheers rose from floor to sky, pure and reckless, and the lights answered with comets of white and gold. Confetti cannons stayed asleep. No need. The moment had already carved its own monument. Freddie stood, head slightly bowed, not in defeat, but in thanks. He put his hand over his chest and tapped twice, "You," then swept his palm out toward them. "Us." He blew a kiss that was half send-off, half signature. "I won't forget tonight," he said. "Not ever." He turned, because shows do end and nights do close, and made a leave, then stopped and looked back as if something tugged at him. Down in the third row, Claire almost didn't realize he was looking in her direction until his gaze found her, little more than a shape among thousands, but somehow singled out by the way she stood, hands still together as if holding the first slow clap between them. Freddie lifted the mic again, and though he didn't say her name, and she would never be certain, Claire knew. "Thank you," he said to one and to all, "for starting the song when I forgot how." He walked off with the band beside him, the four of them a single silhouette dissolving into the wings. Backstage, the crew parted like a congregation. No one slapped backs, no one hooped. Brian set a hand on Freddie's shoulder, the same place he'd anchored him earlier, and left it there long enough to mean something. Roger let out a long breath he'd been holding for half an hour. John smiled that small, steady smile of his, the one that says, "We made it, together." Out in the stands, people didn't rush for the exits. They lingered, voices low, as if leaving quickly would break the spell. Strangers exchanged nods like veterans of the same storm. The lighters finally winked out. Phone screens turned dark. Shoes scraped concrete softly, a last, fading rhythm. Later, they would try to describe it. How a stadium learned to be gentle, how a man remembered his voice, how a legend became human without becoming smaller. They would fail. Some things you only say by singing together, by clapping slow enough for a frightened heart to catch up, by staying. What began as a freeze became a vow. That love, not perfection, is what makes a life unforgettable. And somewhere deep in the night, long after Wembley emptied and the echoes found places to sleep, a single line kept drifting through London like a lullaby without a singer. We are the champions. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.